The dense rain and fog had slowed me down. Before I spotted the third village I was to visit, I'd walked around in circles for a while. With it now painted onto my map, I hopefully wouldn't have that problem again. Monsters surrounded the town, and when my shield shattered, I was unable to continue fighting and escaped by the skin of my teeth. I sought shelter in the first hut I came across, and fortunately it was empty. I didn't fancy having to explain what I was doing to a startled villager. After recuperating, I spent the night in a cave that lay just within the town. In the morning, I found a villager trapped in a rock pool with a hideously bloated zombie. Without hesitation, Two-Bone and I set to their rescue. My fervour was riled up by the villager, who was shouting "Stop!" and "Get away!" at the zombie. After the creature was slain, I turned to humbly accept their thanks, but instead received an angry lecture. They'd been shouting at me. The cleric had been studying the Drowned, a variant of zombie. Where was he going to find another one? I shuffled my feet and looked down as he pointed out the damage I'd done to one of their holy rock pools, as well as the wishing well cave I'd defiled by sleeping there. The cleric had almost banished me from the town on the spot, but after following him back to his alchemy lab, I tried to explain myself and he begrudgingly pointed me towards the upper tier of the town, where I could find their mare. I left just before the cleric figured out I had trespassed during the night. Heading up through the tunnel I had vandalised, I found the surface entrance guarded by an iron golem, who stared at me as I edged past. The mayor was in her office, although she dismissed the idea that she was mayor, just someone the people of Old Carlton looked up to. She introduced herself as Gloria and apologised for the cleric's behaviour, asking me to please have patience with Phineas. He's easily antagonised. She was very civil and introduced me to some of the other villagers. I asked her about the town and was surprised at how knowledgeable she was. Once upon a time, these lands were far more built up and populated, but most evidence of the civilizations were lost without a trace. Even most of the sturdy ancient architecture has since been reduced to dust. This town has always been independent, even when much of these lands were owned by one large belligerent country. I asked how they know these things. Gloria told me there were very few surviving records, but a lot can be gleaned from ancient maps. With the light of the day fading, she allowed me to stay here. I had no choice but to sleep in the Wishing Well cave again. When I interrupted his conversation with Gloria, I avoided Phineas's gaze. He had been complaining about me. She asked if, whilst I was staying here, I could refrain from sleeping in the Wishing Well, and this time it was my turn to apologise. After I explained there was no spare beds for me to sleep in, she gave me planning permission to erect a house there. Judging from the way she reassured me, the look on my face revealed my surprise. She told me Old Carlton held their traditions dear, which shouldn't be so set in their ways that they never build anything ever again. Just don't make anything that stands out too much. I may have been a bit ambitious in my attempts to befriend Phineas. He really disliked me, but let me finish when I offered to replace his drowned test subject. He scoffed at my plan to extend his laboratory, but when I described my ideas for the design, he paused in thought and agreed to let me try. Although his parting remarks conveyed his lack of confidence in me and the promise of unspecified retribution should I ruin his existing lab. I was going to need acacia, iron, glass, and a little ingenuity. My closest source of acacia was on the lower tier of the mountain to the east of Old Carlton, called Mount Portley, because it looked just as wide as it did tall. The small water-clogged cave the cleric called a wishing well laid underneath, with a curtain of water at its entrance. I had found that I was able to swim up the waterfall there just as easily as I swam in the river. It was on Mount Portley that I spent the next week. each day ascending the flowing water by the wishing well and gathering acacia across its shallow slope. At top there was ample iron and coal to be collected, as well as a few emeralds, and on the south-east side there was a grove of oak trees. I had gotten the sand a short ways up the thin lake that encircled Mount Pawley on its northern half. Old Carlton sat on the lake, and you could set sail from either one of its piers. I collapsed into the blissful repetition of chopping and mining, so building progress was slow to begin with. On the first night out of the wishing well, I slept under the stars in the foundations I was working on. The night after, Phineas came to inspect the structure, and even had the audacity to rest in my bed. He watched as I constructed the roof over him, and even with the racket of the construction, he had gotten more sleep than I had. Phineas seemed to enjoy taking my bed, and continued to do so. Not rising to the bait, I once again slept under the stars, only this time on the roof. I wonder if Gloria knew what he was doing. I had caught Phineas telling another of the villagers that they were welcome to use his bed again. The cleric's kindness struck me as odd, and apparently the weaponsmith had noticed too. Phineas saw me approach and hesitated answering the weaponsmith when she asked him where he would sleep. I let Phineas awkwardly mutter a feigned response before turning to the weaponsmith myself to ask how they planned to repair their iron golem. With iron. The weaponsmith's blunt reply was somewhat helpful, and it didn't seem like she was trying to patronise me, but Phineas's scoff showed he clearly thought that it was obvious. The weaponsmith explained that she hadn't got around to it yet. Despite the success of Old Carlton, the historical town was burdened with disrepair, and it struck me that I could help by at least making sure there were enough beds to go round. I extended the structure to have a second floor, and on the ground floor also built a small boathouse. In between building, I pottered around town. One night, a zombie walked straight into the square, but I defended the townsfolk before anyone got hurt. On another day, with Nellie's help, I fixed up the golem, so when I left, the hulking sentry could deal with the monsters. My efforts there went some ways to helping improve my standing with the locals, but Gloria's decision to allow me to build here wasn't popular. Whilst I was proud of the monster prison I'd built in Phineas's new laboratory basement, and my successful attempt to trap a drowned down there, that also wasn't popular. It seemed Phineas's experiments were poorly tolerated, and many here had been relieved when his original test subject was killed. I realised that the villagers likely thought that Gloria had allowed me to extend the lab too. Phineas wasn't around when the lab extension was completed, and I found him sneaking off towards the Wishing Well cave. I wonder what he was doing. I sold some coal to the weaponsmith and bought redstone off Phineas. I knew he'd given me unfavourable terms, but I had hoped that by engaging in trade, the villagers might come round to me. The weaponsmith at least was grateful, in part because I had already relieved her from fixing the golem. Feeling guilty for betraying Gloria's trust, I sailed to the nearby jungle to pick some sugarcane and replanted it in town. I wasn't around long enough to process it into paper, however, as after some tweaks here and there, and fitting the tight barracks with beds, the structure was complete and I was ready to leave. I had stayed here for quite some time and was worried I had far since outstayed my welcome. It seems my suspicions were correct, as the townsfolk acted ambivalently when I said goodbye, despite the help I'd offered. Rather than being grateful, Phineas was gleeful that he had managed to get so much out of me. And it may have been his comments that had soured some of the other villagers towards me. Perhaps he was trying to elevate his own standing by pulling me down. I tried idle pleasantries to leave the townsfolk with a good impression, but that ended up being the final straw when I told them I preferred the weather here than in Lushville. Simply associating myself with their neighbouring town was apparently an insult. I wasn't looking forward to facing Gloria again, but found she had a more nuanced outlook to my visit. I thanked her for her hospitality, and she thanked me for my help, also adding that, in future constructions here, I could make terracotta out of clay. I wanted to ask more about why Old Carlton and Lushville didn't get on, but thought it best not to push my luck. I started to explain myself for imprisoning a dangerous zombie within the town, but she interrupted me and smiled. The merchant was right about you. I knew he'd been gossiping. I headed back, climbing over Mount Portley, and instead of setting sail from Copperwater Cave, decided to follow my old waypoints to navigate the dirty slopes. My trip to Lushville and Old Carlton had left me on marginally better standings than the complete neutrality I'd begun with, and I'd learnt that I was able to sell paper to Gloria and her assistant, coal to the weaponsmith, zombie flesh to Phineas, and various foodstuffs in Lushville. But for now, I was glad to be home. I learnt that when you trade with a villager, you lock in their profession. So before that, everyone was just kind of switching professions randomly. And I was also thinking that anyone that was unemployed was actually a nitwit. So I have to apologise to Fergus from the Grumpy Village, because I think it's in chapter 7 I implied that he was a nitwit, and I don't think he is. It's fun to learn as you play, but I should probably start looking up a few more things just so I know what I'm doing, at least a little bit more. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.